Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging headfirst into a legal saga that, well, it really transcended courtrooms and gripped a nation. Where facts seem to morph into these fiercely contested narratives.
Mhm.
These aren't just legal verdicts we're talking about, they become like cultural touchstones. They force us all to question what we believe, how information is handled, and the very nature of justice itself.
That's exactly right. Our mission today is to unpack the Karen Reed case. It was this recent Massachusetts trial that just became a national phenomenon. And this isn't merely about a verdict or even, just one person's fate. It's a fascinating, really complex look
Yeah.
at how information, and yes, sometimes misinformation, can dramatically shape public perception, how it can influence a jury, and ultimately determine an outcome, all in real time, very publicly.
Exactly. At its heart, we're talking about John O'Keefe, a Boston police officer who was tragically found deceased in the snow, and his girlfriend, Karen Reed, who, well, she swiftly became the accused, charged with causing his death. The prosecution's core allegation was stark, almost chillingly simple. Reed, after a night out, hit O'Keefe with her SUV and then, they claimed, left him to perish in the brutal cold.
But here's where it gets really interesting and just incredibly complex for everyone involved, right? The defense didn't just deny those charges. They countered with this shocking, audacious theory that spun the entire narrative completely on its head. Karen Reed, they argued, was framed.
Wow.
Yeah. Their claim was that O'Keefe was actually beaten inside a house by others during a gathering, and then his body was deliberately moved and left outside. You have to admit, presenting two such wildly different explanations for the same tragic incident, it immediately creates this profound challenge for anyone trying to figure out the truth.
Absolutely. So, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to navigate this labyrinth of information with us. What's incredible here is how these two vastly different, diametrically opposed explanations emerged from the same incident. It forced everyone, the public, the jury, even investigators, to question what they believed or, what they were led to believe. You'll gain a deep insight into the challenges of discerning truth in this world of information overload. We're drawing on comprehensive sources, including official timelines, court documents, detailed media reports.
It's really a masterclass in how narratives get built, how they're debated, and ultimately how they're decided by a jury.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning. The initial shock the night John O'Keefe lost his life, January 29th, 2022. Those hours leading up to this fateful morning became absolutely crucial for both sides of the case, didn't they? Setting the stage for these competing narratives.
Indeed. So on the evening of January 28th, 2022, John O'Keefe and Karen Reed were out with a group of friends. They started at C.F. McCarthy's in Canton around 9 p.m., a familiar local spot. Then they moved to the Waterfall Bar and Grill shortly before 11 p.m.
Okay.
And that's where they met up with Boston police officer Brian Albert and his wife Nicole, among others. And the group dynamic for the night really kind of solidified there. As the bar was closing around midnight, the group was invited back to the Albert residence at 34 Fairview Road. Brian Albert's son was coincidentally celebrating his 23rd birthday there, too.
Right. And the prosecution really honed in on this period, didn't they? Alleging Reed's significant alcohol consumption throughout the evening. They presented this narrative of, escalating tension. They brought forward what they characterized as pretty damning text messages and voicemails, not just from that night, but from the weeks leading up to it. They used these to paint a picture of a strained relationship, fraught with arguments, maybe even verbal aggression. They cited this particularly aggressive voicemail from Reed to O'Keefe around 1 a.m. that morning. She was heard saying, "You are a flow loser, F yourself," and "John, I F hate you."
Oof.
Yeah. That certainly set a very particular damning tone for their narrative, didn't it? From a prosecutor's perspective, how powerful are those kinds of personal messages in shaping a jury's view of motive and, intent?
Oh, they can be incredibly powerful,
Yeah.
especially if they're consistently presented and seem to fit a pattern. What's fascinating here is how immediately the nature of their relationship became such a point of contention. So Reed and O'Keefe were seen leaving the Waterfall Bar together at 12:11 a.m., okay?
Ah.
And they arrived at Brian Albert's home at 12:24 a.m.
Right.
According to initial reports, Reed, maybe unfamiliar with the neighborhood, maybe uncomfortable with the late hour of the crowd, was reportedly hesitant to go inside right away. So O'Keefe went to check if they were welcome. His phone data, which investigators tracked meticulously, showed him walking towards the house at 12:31 a.m., and his phone locked for the very last time at 12:32 a.m.
Yeah.
This precise, minute-by-minute timeline around his last known movements It became incredibly significant. It was the linchpin for both sides' arguments about when and where O'Keefe got those fetal injuries.
Then came the frantic discovery. In the early morning hours, somewhere around, 4 to 5 a.m., Reed was described as increasingly distraught. O'Keefe hadn't come home, wasn't answering his phone. At 4:23 a.m., O'Keefe's niece called Jennifer McCabe, that's Brian Albert's sister-in-law, and reportedly heard Reed screaming in the background that John hadn't returned and they'd had a fight.
Right.
Then around 5 a.m., Reed called another friend, allegedly saying something like, "What if he's dead? What if a plow hit him? I don't remember anything from last night. We drank so much, I don't remember anything."
Those statements, captured early on, were later used, of course, by the prosecution to suggest guilt and maybe a hazy recollection, perhaps conveniently hazy.
Right.
The search for John began around 5:07 a.m. Reed, along with Jennifer McCabe and a third woman, Carrie Roberts, drove around looking for O'Keefe. And this is when Reed reportedly mentioned to the women that she had a crack in her taillight. And she wondered aloud, could she have hit O'Keefe?
Okay, but here's a crucial detail, right? Something the defense really seized on.
Yes.
At precisely 5:07 a.m., the same time they started searching a surveillance camera back at O'Keefe's own home, not the Albert place, captured Reed's SUV coming extremely close, like almost scraping O'Keefe's parked SUV in his driveway.
Exactly. And the defense later jumped all over this. They argued this was the moment the taillight damage occurred. Not from striking John O'Keefe.
No.
It offered this alternative, completely non-incriminating explanation for a really key piece of physical evidence.
That's a critical detail. I mean, it provides a direct, verifiable alternative for the damage the prosecution was linking to O'Keefe's injuries. So then, around 6 a.m., Reed tragically discovers O'Keefe, lying in the snow outside Brian Albert's home, partially covered by snow. An emergency responder, EMT Katie O'Regan, testified that Reed was hysterical, just inconsolable at the scene, and that she repeatedly stated, "I hit him. I hit him."
Right. And that statement became an absolute cornerstone for the prosecution's narrative, presented as this immediate admission of guilt right then and there.
However, and this is where the defense really started to build its counter-narrative, they later argued vehemently that this specific testimony from O'Regan was false and deceptive to the grand jury. They contended that O'Regan and maybe other emergency personnel were pressured, maybe incentivized, to provide testimony that fit the prosecution's story, rather than recalling the exact, maybe more nuanced words spoken in what must have been a highly chaotic and emotional moment.
It really highlights how even seemingly straightforward witness accounts, especially those given under extreme stress, can become these fiercely contested elements in a complex trial. Both sides present their interpretation of the witness's memory, their motivations. Yeah. It's tough.
So the early investigation then unfolds, kind of setting the stage for all the conflicts to come. Detectives at the scene discovered several pieces of physical evidence. There was a broken cocktail glass found near O'Keefe's body and pieces of broken taillight.
Right.
These items immediately became key pieces of the prosecution's puzzle, suggesting an impact event involving Reed's vehicle.
Exactly. And furthermore, a forensic toxicologist estimated Reed's blood alcohol content, her BAC, to be somewhere between 0.13 and 0.29 around 12:45 a.m.
Wow. That's high.
Yeah, well above the legal driving limit of 0.08 in Massachusetts. So this high BAC was used to establish her impaired state and potential recklessness.
And the prosecution really leaned into that, didn't they? The alleged intoxication.
They absolutely did. That estimation of her BAC, it's often done through a process called retrograde extrapolation, basically trying to project BAC backward in time based on, when they last drank, how much, body metabolism. It's an area that can often be debated by defense experts, especially when the timeline is as crucial as it was here. It gives you a range, right? Not a precise number because everyone metabolizes differently.
Sure.
The autopsy, performed on January 31st, 2022, ruled O'Keefe's cause of death as blunt impact injuries to the head and hypothermia. The medical examiner detailed extensive injuries, a laceration to the back of his head, skull fractures, a cut above his right eye, abrasions on his nose and arm, 2 black eyes, and a scratch on his right knee. Pretty significant injuries.
Yeah.
But significantly, the ME also found no obvious signs of an altercation or a fight. Now, that medical finding would become a central point of contention.
Oh, so?
Because the defense later introduced their own theories of an internal altercation causing some of these injuries, particularly the arm wounds and maybe some head trauma from a fall inside.
Yeah.
It created this direct conflict regarding the origin of O'Keefe's head trauma. Was it the car or was it something else?
Okay. And then there was that Google search. one of the most highly contested, scrutinized details of the whole early investigation. Hose long to dying cold, spelled like that, O-O-S.
Yeah, that typo itself became part of the discussion.
So prosecutors allege the search happened after O'Keefe's body was found, specifically between 6:23 and 6:24 a.m. They said it was on a phone linked to Jennifer McCabe, and they argued Red had asked her to do the search. The timing, if true, would imply Red knew what happened, maybe trying to understand the consequences of leaving someone in the cold.
Right. It points towards guilty knowledge, potentially.
But the defense presented an entirely different timeline. They asserted that a federal forensic expert determined the search was made much, much earlier, at 2:27 a.m.
Wow.
Hours before police were even alerted, before the body was found. And they argued it was McCabe who performed it herself, potentially indicating she knew something much earlier.
That timing difference is absolutely massive, isn't it? In terms of implication, it shifts suspicion entirely.
How often do you see such a critical piece of digital evidence become so fiercely disputed over its timestamp alone?
It's rare for a single digital timestamp to become the battleground like this.
Yeah.
But when it happens, it utterly redefines the case. It's just critical because the timing fundamentally shifts its meaning, right? If it was made after the discovery, at Reed's request, okay, maybe it shows a guilty state of mind.
Right.
But if it was made hours earlier, as the defense claimed their expert found, well, that instantly points suspicion squarely toward Jennifer McCabe and others at the Albert house. It implicates them in potentially knowing O'Keefe's fate long before Reed found him. So this single digital footprint and the competing expert analyses of its metadata, it became this fierce battleground throughout both trials. It just underscores how, in modern legal battles, even seemingly mundane digital footprints can become the linchpin, capable of totally upending a narrative. It's a stark reminder that the devil truly is in the digital details.
Yeah.
And it forces jurors to weigh not just the evidence, but the very methods used to retrieve and authenticate it.
So all these early conflicting findings quickly led to charges against Karen Reed. She was arrested on February 1st, 2022. First appeared in Stoughton District Court on February 2nd. At that time, she pleaded not guilty to initial charges, manslaughter, motor vehicle homicide, leaving the scene. She was initially released on, I think, $80,000 bail, which maybe set a relatively low initial bar for the severity in the public eye at that point.
Right. But then, on June 10th, 2022, less than 5 months after the incident, a Norfolk County grand jury indicted Reed on much more serious charges: second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating under the influence of alcohol, and leaving the scene of personal injury and death.
Okay, so a big escalation.
A huge escalation.
Okay.
She pleaded not guilty to these upgraded charges as well and was held on a higher bail, $100,000, which she later made. But that jump from manslaughter to second-degree murder, it indicated the prosecution's increasingly strong belief in her direct culpability and, crucially, intent, suggesting a more calculated act rather than just an accident. And this legal escalation significantly raised the stakes and, of course, the public profile of the case.
Which brings us right to the core of the defense's strategy, the element that truly captivated public attention. It's this battle of narratives, the framing, and those explosive cover-up allegations. Starting around May 2023, Reed's defense attorneys, Alan Jackson and David Yannetti, they launched this full frontal assault on the prosecution's theory, presenting a dramatically different, far more incendiary account of what happened.
They absolutely did. They put forth this counter theory that O'Keefe was involved in a violent altercation inside Brian Albert's home, that he was brutally beaten there and his body was subsequently dumped outside in the snow.
Okay.
They focused on specific wounds to O'Keefe's arms, claiming they were from Albert's dog, Chloe, suggesting an attack happened inside.
The dog, okay.
Yeah. And they also pointed to cuts and lacerations on his head that, in their view, came from being punched and falling backward onto a hard surface inside the house, not from being hit by a car.
So that directly contradicts the medical examiner's initial finding of no obvious signs of an altercation or fight.
Exactly. It challenged the very foundation of the prosecution's medical evidence regarding how he was injured.
And the defense wasn't shy about who they were pointing fingers at or the scale of the alleged wrongdoing.
Not at all.
They argued police never thoroughly searched the home, never treated anyone inside as a suspect, basically ignoring a potential crime scene. What's incredible here is the defense's immediate pivot, accusing law enforcement of an elaborate cover-up involving Massachusetts State Police, Brian Albert, Jennifer McCabe, others in the house.
Yeah.
I mean, this wasn't just a defense against the charges for Reed. It was this strategically audacious counter-accusation. It fundamentally shifted the focus from did Reed do it, to was the investigation even fair and unbiased?
It's such a bold move, and it's full of both risk and potential reward.
Right.
The risk is you might alienate the jury if the allegations seem too far-fetched, or if you can't back them up with compelling evidence. They might think you're just throwing mud.
Right.
The payoff, however, is immense. If you can demonstrate a cover-up, or even just raise serious questions about one, you introduce reasonable doubt not just about your client's guilt, but about the integrity of the entire system that brought the charges. These were very serious allegations, suggesting this conspiracy to protect certain individuals at the expense of justice. And it made the integrity of the investigation itself a central part of the trial. It almost felt like the state police were on trial alongside Karen Reed.
And the integrity of that investigation came under massive, intense scrutiny. The defense specifically called out Trooper Michael Proctor, the lead investigator. They pointed to his alleged personal ties to people involved, namely the Alberts and McCabe's, suggesting this deep, undeniable conflict of interest that, they argued, tainted the whole investigation from the start. And what's even more shocking, and what really damaged the prosecution's case in the public eye, is that Proctor would later be fired for inappropriate text messages about Reed.
Those texts were unbelievable.
Right. Incredibly vulgar, calling her a whack job cunt, saying zero chance she skates, she's uffed. He also reportedly texted that he hoped she would kill herself.
Just awful stuff. And this revelation emerged during discovery. It was presented to the jury. It painted this stark picture of potential investigator bias. You just can't ignore that.
Absolutely. And Proctor's internal investigation reviewed, he also shared sensitive and Mendor potential investigative steps with non-law enforcement personnel, basically leaking information from a live investigation.
Yeah.
That kind of behavior from a lead investigator, it profoundly undermines public trust. And it certainly offered the defense substantial ammunition to question the entire investigation's impartiality.
And it wasn't just the text. The defense pointed to the use of unconventional, unprofessional items like solo cups and, get this, stop-and-shop grocery bags for evidence collection at the scene.
Seriously. Grocery bags.
Yeah, instead of standard forensic containers. This further fueled concerns about professional conduct. It raised doubts about the chain of custody, the uncompromised state of the evidence. When you see such basic procedural errors, it allows...
It's huge. This expert testimony was a truly critical turning point for the defense. It created significant reasonable doubt around that central claim of Reed striking O'Keefe with her SUV.
Yeah.
It highlights this battle of the experts, where you have highly qualified individuals using the same data, reaching totally different conclusions based on their methodologies, their interpretations.
It forces the jury to weigh these two highly technical, conflicting interpretations of the physical evidence. And ultimately, they have to decide which expert's methodology and findings seem more credible, more persuasive.
This is where the defense really sought to unravel the prosecution's narrative piece by piece, using science.
And then there's the whole blue wall of silence accusation. That gained significant traction throughout this case.
Right. That term often used to describe this informal code among police officers, protecting one another from external scrutiny, especially misconduct. It cast this significant shadow over the investigation.
And it wasn't just theoretical. Federal agent Brian Higgins, who was at the party at the Albert residence, he actually acknowledged under oath that he destroyed his phone and SIM card after the incident, disposed of them in 2 different locations on a military base.
Wait, what? He admitted that?
Admitted it, under oath.
That raises so many red flags, doesn't it? How severely did that particular action damage the prosecution's case? And what could the defense do with that legally?
Oh, destroying evidence, especially by a law enforcement officer. It creates an immediate cloud of suspicion. It strongly suggests an attempt to conceal information. In the legal world, it's called spoliation of evidence, and it can lead to very negative inferences being drawn by a jury against the party that destroyed it.
Okay.
And you couple that with further allegations that Brian Albert himself sold his house and got rid of his dog, Chloe, shortly after the incident.
The dog the defense claimed caused some of the arm injury.
Exactly. And then add in that particularly damning group text from the morning O'Keefe was found, where one person apparently suggested they all agree O'Keefe never entered the home, and Albert responded, exactly. These details, taken together, paint a truly troubling picture of potential coordinated efforts to obscure what might have happened inside that house.
Each of these actions, while maybe not definitive proof on its own, cumulatively just fed into the defense's narrative of a systemic cover-up.
And let's not forget the timing of Jennifer McCabe's "How Long to Die in Cold" Google search, that remained just deeply contentious through both trials.
Right. The defense adamantly asserted it happened at 2:27 a.m., hours before the body was found, arguing it was McCabe, acting suspiciously, who performed it. They had their own forensic analysis for this. Meanwhile, the prosecution maintained it occurred later, after O'Keefe's body was discovered, around 6:23 a.m., and was done at Reed's request.
This one piece of digital evidence was just fiercely debated. Its timestamp had these profound implications for either side's narrative, right?
Yeah.
Directly implicating or exonerating Reed's based purely on when it happened.
It's incredible.
Yeah, the timestamp of that search was arguably one of the most critical elements of evidence. It fundamentally altered who was suspected of what and when they knew it. And the very fact that federal investigators, specifically from the U.S. Attorney's Office, got involved, opening a probe into the Norfolk District Attorney's Office regarding this case, that underscored the depth of concern about potential misconduct and a potential cover-up surrounding this and other evidence.
Federal scrutiny.
Yeah. That federal scrutiny lent significant weight to the defense's claims that something was really amiss with the initial investigation.
All of this just fueled an intense public reaction. The case gained massive public attention, especially due to this blogger, Aidan Kearney, known to his followers as Turtle Boy.
Turtle Boy.
He extensively covered the case under the highly provocative headline, "Can't Cover Up." He was often confronting witnesses, publishing...
His actions, though, eventually led to his own arrest on charges of witness intimidation, demonstrating that very fine line between, say, citizen journalism and potential legal interference.
Right. And the Norfolk District Attorney's Office, on the other hand, strongly pushed back against the defense's narrative and Kearney's coverage. They stated unequivocally that conspiracy theories are not evidence. And they accused the defense of a desperate attempt to reassign guilt. This just shows the stark division, not just in the courtroom, but in the official and public narratives. It turned the case into this battle for public opinion as much as a legal one.
Absolutely. And the community of Canton itself became deeply, perhaps irrevocably divided. You had these rolling rallies, protests by Karen Reed supporters, consistently wearing pink as a sign of solidarity.
Right, the pink shirts.
Yeah, loudly alleging a cover-up, demanding justice for Reed. It truly split the town, pitting neighbor against neighbor. It even exposed some pre-existing family feuds that just got intensified by the glare of this high-profile case.
And what's significant is that an independent audit of the Canton Police Department, which was actually voted for by residents themselves, it later found issues with the initial investigation. The report noted a lack of initial photographs of O'Keefe at the scene before his body was moved.
Which is basic procedure.
Right. Unrecorded witness interviews, another major procedural lapse. And unpreserved video footage of Reed's SUV while it was in police custody.
Wow.
These findings, coming from an independent audit, lent significant official credence to the defense's claims of a flawed, maybe even compromised, initial investigation. It added real weight to their cover-up allegations.
And those findings really set the stage for the dramatic legal battles that followed. We saw not one, but two trials, each a deep dive into legal strategy, how evidence was presented, and intense jury deliberation.
The first trial began in April 2024 at Norfolk Superior Court. Reed's defense team included her initial attorney, David Yannetti, who'd been with her from the start. But then they brought in these prominent Los Angeles-based attorneys, Alan Jackson and Elizabeth Little.
Right, the heavy hitters.
Exactly. The addition of these high-profile national defense lawyers signaled the defense's serious commitment and resources. And it also attracted significant national media attention, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It signaled this was going to be a major fight. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorneys Adam Lally and Laura McLaughlin, focused intensely on Reed's alleged intoxication and that damning voicemail she left O'Keefe. They repeatedly played it for the jury to emphasize her anger, the strained nature of their relationship. They presented evidence of the broken taillight found at the scene. Crucially, mentioning O'Keefe's DNA was found on an intact piece of taillight still on Reed's SUV.
Okay.
Along with DNA from two unknown males, though the prosecution tried to minimize the significance of that latter finding.
Interesting.
They also relied heavily on the testimony of emergency responders, like EMT Katie O'Regan, who said they heard Reed repeatedly state, "I hit him." The prosecution sought to weave these elements into this cohesive narrative. Reed, intoxicated, angry, strikes O'Keefe, leaves him to succumb to the elements.
But the defense, they just aggressively pursued their theory of an alternative culprit and a frame-up.
Hmm.
They meticulously highlighted the integrity issues of the investigation, the questionable evidence collection, like using household items.
The Solo cups and grocery bag?
Right, and the perceived conflicts of interest, especially regarding Trooper Proctor's personal ties to people at the Albert home and, of course, his inappropriate texts.
Yeah.
They introduced their own crash reconstruction experts, like Andrew Rouleau, emphasizing O'Keefe's injuries were inconsistent with being hit by a vehicle, and that the vehicle damage was consistent with Reed hitting O'Keefe's parked SUV at his own home earlier, not him.
Their strategy was clearly to create sufficient reasonable doubt by just attacking the prosecution's case at every turn and presenting this compelling alternative story.
The trial was extensive, a marathon, really. Testimony from a remarkable 68 witnesses over 8 weeks.
8 weeks.
Yeah. Despite all that evidence, all those hours of testimony, the jury, after a grueling 25 hours of deliberation, they declared themselves deeply divided on July 1st, 2024, which of course led to a mistrial. A frustrating outcome for both sides and for the public just waiting for a resolution.
Yeah, a mistrial is always tough. The immediate fallout was significant, though, and very telling about the internal state of the investigation. Hours after the mistrial was declared, Massachusetts State Police announced that Trooper Michael Proctor, the lead investigator whose conduct had been so heavily scrutinized, was relieved of duty.
Wow, immediately.
Immediately. He was later suspended without pay and then formally fired by Massachusetts State Police on March 19, 2025, for the inappropriate text messages and for providing sensitive and owner potential investigative steps to non-law enforcement personnel.
That's huge. Coming from the state police themselves, a massive blow to the prosecution's credibility, surely.
Absolutely. And Canton Police Det Kevin Albert, another figure implicated by the defense, was also suspended. It indicated serious repercussions for law enforcement's handling of the case.
What's truly fascinating, though, and became another flashpoint of legal strategy, is what came out after the mistrial. Some jurors revealed to the media that they had actually unanimously found Red not guilty on 2 of the 3 charges,
Oh, interesting.
but were hung on the 3rd, meaning they just couldn't reach a consensus on that specific count.
Okay.
Raid's attorneys immediately seized on this, appealing to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, even the U.S. Supreme Court, on double jeopardy grounds.
Right. Double jeopardy, the idea you can't be tried for the same crime twice after an acquittal or conviction.
Exactly. But a hung jury or mistrial, like here, generally doesn't trigger double jeopardy because the first trial didn't result in a final verdict. So the case can usually be retried on all original charges.
And that's what happened.
Yep. All appeals were swiftly denied. The message was clear. Despite the defense's best efforts, she would face trial again on all 3 major charges.
That refusal by the higher courts, despite some jurors indicating acquittal on specific counts, it really underscored the legal system's commitment to allowing a full retrial when a jury is deadlocked. It must have created this powerful sense of anticipation for the second round. A do-over, with new jurors, potentially refined strategies from both sides, now knowing what the first trial revealed.
And so the second trial began on April 1st, 2025, with a new special prosecutor, Hank Brennan, leading the charge for the Commonwealth.
A notable change. The previous prosecutor stayed with the DA's office, but Brennan was brought in specifically for this retrial, maybe for a fresh perspective.
Right. Reed's defense team also expanded, adding Robert Alessi and, remarkably, Victoria George.
Wait, Victoria George, wasn't she?
Yes, she had been an alternate juror from the first trial.
Get out. An alternate juror joined the defense team.
Yep. Her inclusion was highly unusual, raised a lot of eyebrows, given her prior proximity to the case.
I'll bet. So the second trial,
Right.
did it just rehash everything?
Pretty much. It essentially recovered much of the same ground, revisiting many contentious points, but obviously with the benefit of hindsight, right? Knowing what worked and didn't work the first time.
Yeah.
The timeline of the How Long to Die in Cold Google search was again a focal point. Both sides trotted out their forensic experts' analyses.
Okay.
The taillight evidence was re-examined, and get this, a Canton police officer testified the taillight was cracked, not completely damaged.
How did that compare to Proctor?
Well, that description directly contradicted Trooper Proctor's later, more severe description, creating another inconsistency within the prosecution's own evidence.
Interesting.
The defense brought back the dog bite theory, continued to hammer on the alleged police misconduct. They knew how effective those arguments had been in creating doubt the first time around.
Makes sense. What about the prosecution's approach?
Prosecutors, for their part, again presented the angry voicemails Reed left for O'Keefe, played videos of Reed drinking throughout the night, offered detailed forensic analysis of her vehicle's movements, trying to reconstruct the moments they believed she struck O'Keefe.
So trying to solidify their initial narrative, maybe presenting it more forcefully with new emphasis, having learned from the first jury's division.
Seems like it. But the defense, bolstered by their expert crash reconstructionists, just continued to argue fiercely that O'Keefe's injuries were fundamentally inconsistent with being hit by a vehicle. They maintained the vehicle damage on Reed's SUV, especially the broken taillight, was consistent with her hitting O'Keefe's parked SUV at his own home earlier. Not him. The trial saw particularly intense cross-examination of key prosecution witnesses, like Jennifer McCabe. The defense really pushed hard on inconsistencies, her changing statements, perceived evasions about what happened inside the Albert home, the timing of that Google search.
It sounds like it became a grueling battle of credibility for the witnesses,
Yeah,
as much as a battle of evidence.
definitely felt that way. So, after 4 days of deliberation in the second trial, significantly shorter than the 25 hours the first time,
Yeah, that's much quicker.
on June 18th, 2025, the jury delivered its verdict. The tension in the courtroom was apparently palpable. The verdict: not guilty on second-degree murder, not guilty on manslaughter while operating under the influence, and not guilty on leaving the scene of an accident resulting in death.
Wow. Acquitted on all major charges.
All major charges. A truly impactful, almost seismic moment for everyone involved.
So what was she found guilty of? Anything?
She was found guilty of the lesser charge of driving under the influence of alcohol, for which she received a standard sentence, 1 year probation.
Probation for DUI.
Yeah.
After facing murder charges. That's quite an outcome.
And the roar from the hundreds of supporters clad in pink outside the courthouse who had gathered day in and day out was apparently audible inside the courtroom as the verdict was read. Just this wave of cheers and relief.
I can only imagine.
Karen Reed, visibly emotional but composed, gave brief remarks outside court. She thanked her supporters and stated, quote, "No one has fought harder for justice for John O'Keefe than I have and my team."
That's a powerful statement. Framing her acquittal not as the end, but as a redirection of the pursuit of truth for O'Keefe.
Exactly. But the O'Keefe family and key prosecution witnesses, they expressed profound devastation, calling the verdict a devastating miscarriage of justice.
Understandable.
They lamented that, in their view, this prosecution was infected by lies and conspiracy theories perpetuated by the defense and the public.
Yeah, you can see how raw those emotions would be on both sides.
A juror from the trial later spoke out, offering this rare glimpse into the jury's reasoning.
Oh, what do they say?
They suggested the jury simply couldn't prove there was a collision between Reed's vehicle and O'Keefe, and that there were just too many holes in the police investigation, echoing many of the defense's core arguments.
So reasonable doubt won out because of the investigation's flaws, essentially.
Seems that way. District Attorney Michael Morrissey, in a concise, somber statement, simply said, "The jury has spoken," acknowledging the outcome without further comment.
So, with the criminal acquittal of Karen Reed, we're left with these significant, lingering questions, right? And broader implications that extend far beyond just this one case, touching on public trust, media, the nature of justice.
Absolutely. The most immediate, central question for many remains: if not Karen Reed, then who is responsible for John O'Keefe's death?
Right. The jury found the prosecution hadn't proven their case, but that doesn't mean his passing wasn't the result of foul play.
Exactly. Reed's defense and her legions of supporters are now calling for a renewed, independent investigation to find the true answers. They argue the original focus was fundamentally misdirected, that the actual perpetrators, if any, remain uninvestigated.
And despite the criminal acquittal, she still faces that wrongful death lawsuit filed by the O'Keefe family.
Ah, right, the civil suit.
Yeah. This civil suit names her and 2 Canton bars, alleging over-serving of alcohol led to his death. So her legal battles aren't totally over, just shifted to the civil realm.
Where the burden of proof is lower, right, preponderance of the evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt.
Exactly. Meaning, even if cleared criminally, she could still potentially be held financially liable.
This case has undeniably deeply divided the Canton community, exposed underlying tensions, family feuds that existed long before O'Keefe's passing, but perhaps even more significantly, the intense scrutiny on law enforcement, especially Trooper Proctor's admitted misconduct, his firing, the Canton PD's initial handling of the scene. Lack of photos, unrecorded interviews, unpreserved video.
Yeah.
It highlights these broader systemic questions about accountability, potential biases within investigations. This isn't just about one potentially bad apple. It raises questions about institutional integrity.
And the public reaction was so strong, it led to calls for that independent audit of the Canton PD, which did find issues, as we discussed.
Yeah.
There was even a proposed citizen ballot initiative for recall elections in Massachusetts for public officials, reflecting this significant erosion of public trust in local institutions in the justice system.
The public was so invested, so convinced of a systemic failure, they were demanding tangible change.
And what's fascinating here is how the Karen Reed case became this massive media sensation, a true crime phenomenon. Netflix docs, 2020, Dateline podcasts.
Yeah, it was everywhere.
It demonstrates how these true crime narratives can just captivate and divide audiences, sometimes in very intense, almost tribal ways. Karen Reed herself even capitalized on this attention, didn't she? Giving interviews to Vanity Fair, talking about her mounting legal fees. She said at least $5 million.
$5 million, wow.
Yeah, and responding to her critics directly, it really highlights the intertwining of legal strategy with public relations in these high-profile cases.
This case really blurred the lines, didn't it, between the formal legal process and the court of public opinion.
Totally.
The narrative was heavily influenced by both the official court proceedings and external citizen journalism, particularly from that blogger, Turtle Boy. His Canton cover-up coverage, with its daily updates, confrontational style, it created this unique public engagement that sometimes felt like its own parallel investigation, influencing public opinion and, some would argue, the perception of the trial itself.
This phenomenon, citizen journalism, social media amplification in real-time criminal trials, it's a relatively new and powerful force, creates a public courtroom alongside the legal one.
Yeah.
And it raises significant questions about how such narratives impact justice, witness integrity, jury impartiality. When public sentiment runs so strongly, potentially way ahead of formal legal findings, it's a real double-edged sword. Increases transparency, maybe, but also risks prejudgment and harassment.
And the case also revealed connections to other controversial investigations in the region, like the death of Sandra Birchmore, another case where federal intervention contradicted initial local police findings.
Right. That raises questions about potential systemic issues in law enforcement investigations in the area, suggesting this might not have been just an isolated incident.
Furthermore, the defense lawyer for Brian Walsh, accused of ending his wife Anna's life in that separate high-profile case, he even suggested that Trooper Proctor's alleged bias and misconduct in the Reed case might play a role in his client's separate case.
Wow. So the ripples spread outwards.
Exactly. It indicates how one high-profile case can prompt scrutiny and challenges in other, seemingly unrelated legal battles, creating this broader conversation about police practices across the state.
So what we've seen in this deep dive into the Karen Reed case, it's just a stark reminder, isn't it? That even with extensive evidence, multiple trials, definitive answers can remain elusive, especially when the investigations themselves become points of contention.
Yeah. It's a case where every piece of information was challenged, every action scrutinized, every narrative fiercely debated, leaving so many to wonder about the ultimate truth of what occurred that cold January morning.
And for you, the learner, this case really underscores the vital importance of critical thinking when you're confronted with complex, conflicting information. How do you weigh conflicting accounts, especially when they're presented by seemingly credible sources on both sides? How do you identify potential biases, even subtle ones, maybe from official sources that might steer a narrative? And how do you form your own understanding when the lines between fact and theory become so blurred by public opinion, media amplification, and sophisticated legal strategy?
It really is. In a world just saturated with information, where cases like Karen Reed's unfold in real time across traditional media and social platforms, what does the journey for truth truly look like anymore?
Yeah.
And can a community ever fully heal when so many fundamental questions remain unanswered, even after a verdict has been rendered, even after the legal process has seemingly run its course?
This case leads us to ponder not just what happened on that fateful night, but what it means for how we as a society process justice, truth, and the powerful narratives that shape our understanding.